Asto Tarasata Shishimad A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem Sakoho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivas Arigor Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinatha Shai Mukunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Mayapur Dham Ki Jai, Jagannath Puri Ki Jai, Ganga Mai Ki Jai, Jamuna Mai Ki Jai, Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai, Bhakti Devi Ki Jai, Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. Today we're continuing with the reading of Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, Volume 3, Chapter 1. Swami invites the hippies. Last week, in a very methodical way, Satsvarup Maharaj is introducing key disciples of Srila Prabhupada who in their history of service did a lot of service for Prabhupada. So, of course, we had heard about Mukunda and Janaki, and they inspired their friends Sam and Melanie, who became Shyam Sundar and Malati. And we also heard last week about Jamuna and Gurudas and their marriage that got off to a slow start because they used margarine instead of ghee in the yagya, so Prabhupada couldn't get the fire lit. So this week we're hearing about another couple that joined, two couples that joined Srila Prabhupada in San Francisco. And we were just in the middle of learning about the entrance of Dayananda and Nandarani into Srila Prabhupada's spiritual family. They had come to experience hippie life, and they were quite disillusioned by it. They were both very intelligent young people. And Dayananda had just gotten out of the Marines, which are the topmost of the military in America. And he was not prepared to live a druggy, free life after that. So he went out and got a job, as did Nancy, who became Nandarani. So though they were living in San Francisco, they were looking for spiritual guidance. They weren't really living a hippie life. And they found out about Srila Prabhupada. Nancy was roaming through a head shop and she found a Back to Godhead magazine, and they decided to visit the temple, and they were recommended to come to the morning and evening programs. Srila Prabhupada was having his classes then. So we'll continue from there. At the morning program, they found a smaller group, because when they went in the evening, it was quite wild. The people were dancing in a disorganized manner, and they couldn't understand Srila Prabhupada's accent very well when he was giving the lecture. So they were hoping they would have a better experience in the morning time, which was guaranteed to be a little more quiet. So at the morning program, they found a smaller group, a dozen devotees with beads for chanting draped around their necks, and a few street people. The kirtan seemed sweeter and more mellow, and Michael and Nancy chanted and danced along with the devotees. Then Prabhupada spoke, and this time they caught a few of his ideas. They stayed for breakfast and became friends with, these are the couples that had already been initiated, Mukunda and Janaki, Sam and Melanie, now Shyam Sundar and Malati, Jamuna and Gurudas, and Govindadasi and Gaur Sundar. They liked the devotees and promised to come again that evening. Soon they were regularly attending the morning and evening programs, and Nancy, along with the other women, was attending Prabhupada's weekend cooking classes. So here we have a picture, the tall devotee behind Srila Prabhupada, that is who would become Dayananda. And he and his wife would go to Los Angeles and run the Los Angeles temple, and then they would go on to run our first Gurukula in Dallas, Texas. They did wonderful service for Srila Prabhupada. Now in the meantime, Srila Prabhupada was training the devotees how to cook, and he became organized classes on the weekends. And these classes were combined together to make the first Hare Krishna cookbook. And you can find that some of these first recipes that Srila Prabhupada taught the devotees, and also recipes that the devotees incorporated from their American cooking as offerings to Krishna. For instance, the Simply Wonderfuls. Simply Wonderfuls were, of course, here we have burfi, and we have sandesh, and we have the traditional sweets that are made out of milk and paneer. So the devotees, they found a new recipe that they created themselves. It was made out of powdered milk with ghee and powdered sugar. And these were very, very tasty and much appreciated sweets. They were so easy to make, there was no cooking involved. And Prabhupada named them Simply Wonderful. And one time when Prabhupada was giving a lecture in New York City, because we used to pass these Simply Wonderfuls out on Sankirtan to the people. And one devotee asked Prabhupada, Prabhupada, what happens when we pass out these Simply Wonderfuls to the people on the street? And Prabhupada replied, they become simply wonderful. So it was mostly it was Prabhupada training the devotees in Vedic cooking, but in this cookbook that they made from these recipes, they also added the Americanized Vedic preparations that they were making for the deities. Michael was open to Prabhupada's ideas, but he had difficulty accepting the necessity of surrendering to a spiritual authority. His tendency was to reject authorities. Yes, that was the system in those days. You rejected the authorities and you looked for your own philosophy in life, because they saw that their parents weren't happy, their grandparents weren't happy, the world was a mess, there's wars going on everywhere, so better to reject those authorities and find another purpose in life. But the more he thought about it, the more he saw that Prabhupada was right. He had to accept an authority. He reasoned, every time I stop at a red light, that means a traffic light, I'm accepting an authority. And finally, he concluded that to progress in spiritual understanding, he would have to accept a spiritual authority. It's just like when you go to a school, you place yourself under a teacher. And if you want to make advancement in that field of knowledge, you have to accept the authority of the teacher, because that teacher is going to train you. So it's exactly the same in spiritual life. We have many gurus in our life. We can have a dancing guru, a music guru, a martial arts guru. But when it comes to bhakti yoga, you need a particular type of guru who can teach you about Krishna and which shastras to study, because the Vedas are so voluminous, which shastras will help you on your path back to Krishna. Yet, because he didn't want to accept it, he was in a dilemma. Finally, after hearing Prabhupada's lectures for 2 weeks, Michael decided to surrender to Prabhupada's authority and try to become Krishna conscious. Michael. Nancy and I decided to get married and become Swamiji's disciples and members of his society. We told some of the devotees, we would like to see Swamiji. They said, yes, just go up. He's on the 3rd floor. We were a little surprised that there were no formalities required. So Prabhupada had an open door policy, even when he was in New York City. Anyone could go up and ask him questions, sit down and speak with him. And he had that same policy in San Francisco. It might have created some discord because sometimes some crazy people came up, but the door was always open, and there was always someone, a servant, at this time it was Ranchor, to more or less screen the devotees. And when we got to the door, his servant Ranchor let us in. We went in with our shoes on, so Ranchor had to ask us to take them off. So it was small things like that. They were just learning the do's and don'ts for when you approach a spiritual master. Now, I've chosen this picture because this was the Gurukula that we had in Dallas at that time. Soon after, in around 1970, 71, the Gurukula was started. And it was recommended that the children from age 5 to 15 go there for their studies. They had some qualified teachers there. And when the children were all together there in the Dallas Gurukula, then the parents would be free to engage in service at the temples. So this was the system of education up until 1976, when the Gurukula was closed, and the older children were brought here to Vrindavan because our Gurukula was under construction at that time. They stayed on the top floor of our guest house here. And when the Gurukul opened in 1976, Janmastami, then the boys shifted there and the Gurukul was officially started. So this was the first of our Gurukulas in ISKCON that Dayananda and Nandarani oversaw. I didn't know exactly what to say to Swamiji. I was depending on my future wife to make the initial opening. But then I finally said, we came because we would like to become members of your Krishna Conscious Society. He said this was very nice. Then I said that actually the main reason we were there was that we wanted to be married. We knew that he performed marriage ceremonies and that it was part of the society's requirements that couples had to be duly married before they could live together. Swamiji asked me if I liked the philosophy and if I had a job. My answer to both questions was yes. He explained that first of all, we would have to be initiated, and then we could be married the next month. So you'll see that not everyone who came to Srila Prabhupada, although this was the heartland of hippiedom, not everyone was a hippie. Some of them had jobs. They were all well educated. And they were seriously looking for spiritual life. And because now they had an option, they were willing to get married. Whereas in hippie life, there was no question of formal marriage because they didn't accept authorities. So they saw this as an opportunity because Srila Prabhupada, being officially the founder Acharya of ISKCON, he was considered a minister and he was legally qualified to perform the marriage ceremonies. So for both reasons they approached Srila Prabhupada. One, to join the society as his disciples, and two, to become married. And the process, as I've explained several times, set down by Srila Prabhupada was first you take initiation, and then you decide to get married. At their initiation, Michael received the name Dayananda, and Nancy received the name Nandarani. Soon Prabhupada performed their marriage. Nandarani. We knew it would be a very big wedding. In Haight-Ashbury, whenever Swamiji would perform a wedding, hundreds of people would come and the temple would be filled. My parents were coming, and Dayananda's parents were also coming. So to see these fire sacrifices and to see the commitment of the devotees, it was very attractive for the young people. So they came by the hundreds to see these ceremonies, the fire sacrifices, and the commitment of the devotees, and that attracted more people to come and join as well. And of course, Srila Prabhupada, he was performing all of the ceremonies at that time. He had not yet trained his disciples how to do the fire sacrifices. Later, when Prabhupada was performing the initiation ceremonies, other fire sacrifices, he would sit, but by that time he had trained some of his disciples to do the formalities of the fire sacrifice. But at this time still, 1967, Prabhupada was doing everything himself. Swamiji said that it was proper that I cook. He said I should come to his apartment on the morning of the wedding, and he would help me cook something for the wedding feast. So that morning I put on my best jeans and my best sweatshirt and my boots. And I went off to Swamiji's apartment. When I got upstairs, I walked in with my boots on. Swamiji was sitting there in his rocking chair. He smiled at me and said, "Oh, you have come to cook?" I said, "Yes." He sat there and looked at me, one of those long, silent stares. He said, "First take off the boots." What did they know? They were very sincere, but they were really very naive, let's call it. After I took off my boots and my old leather jacket, Swamiji got up and went into the kitchen. He got a very large pot that had been burned so thick on the bottom. Okay, I'll read on. It had been burned so thick on the bottom that practically there was no metal visible. He handed it to me and said, "We want to boil milk in this pot. It has to be washed." There wasn't a sink in Swamiji's kitchen, only a teeny round basin. So I went into the bathroom, put the pot in the bathtub, and rinsed it out. I assumed Swamiji didn't want the black off of the bottom because it was burned on. So I brought it back to him and he said, "Oh, that is very clean. But just take off this little black on the bottom here." This is how Prabhupada taught us how to clean our hearts, by washing the pots. Anyone can guarantee to you, when they would walk in the door and want to become devotees, practically one of the first services they would be given was washing the pots. And that was considered cleaning our hearts when we washed the pots nicely. So Prabhupada wanted that black taken off. I said, "Okay," and got a knife and crawled into the bathtub and started scrubbing the black off. I worked and worked and worked, and I scrubbed and scrubbed. I had cleanser up to my elbows, and I made a mess everywhere. I had gotten about half the black off. The rest seemed to be more or less an integral part of the bottom. So I took the pot back to Swamiji and said, "This is the best I can do. All of this is burned on." He said, "Yes, yes, you've done a wonderful job. Now just take off this little black that's left. This is the day of her wedding. So I went back into the bathtub and scrubbed and scrubbed and scrubbed. It was almost midday when I came out of the bathtub with all the black scrubbed off the bottom of that pot. He was so happy when I brought the pot in. It was sparkling. A big smile came on his face, and he said, "Oh, this is perfect." I was exhausted. So this brings me a memory that I have here of washing pots for Prabhupada, because we didn't have any water. We didn't have running water. We had the well. We'd have to bring the well to Prabhupada's house to wash his pots. And not only did we not have water, we didn't have soap. We didn't have scrub brushes. We used Brajraj. And we take a rope and wrap it up and scrub the pots that way. We were living in Braj. We had to live like the Brijbasis. So one day I was really struggling, because you'd have to, here in Prabhupada's garden, you have to take the buckets out. You'd have to take all of the pots out from the kitchen, wash everything out there. And not only was there difficulty for washing, but there were animals. We had monkeys and we had crows. And they would just be waiting to come in, and whatever little food was there, they would come and attack us for it. So I was washing the pots, and along comes I think it was a crow, and he comes zooming in, and I'm ready to fight him off. I pick up the grinding. We didn't have any electricity, so we only used the mortar and the the silbata. I pick up the silbata. I'm chasing after the crow. I got my rope in one hand. I got the silbata in the other hand. I'm running after the crow, and out comes Srila Prabhupada. And he just starts laughing. And then a devotee just dropped out of the sky. His name was, he didn't have a devotee name. Now he's a guru. His name is Gopaswami in France. So he came here. He couldn't speak any English. He only knew French. How he found about Vrindavan, he must have met the devotees in France. And of course, the first thing we gave him to do was washing the pots. And he was a doctor. So there he was helping me wash the pots, and Prabhupada would come out and he would be very happy to see us washing the pots. And it was just this time of year. It was July, and the rains had just started, and we were reading about the Chaturmas, Narada Muni, when he was a little boy, and how he would wash the utensils of the Bhaktivedantas and sometimes get the remnants of their food. So Prabhupada was very happy that this medical student was washing the pots. He had come to surrender, become a devotee in Vrindavan, and he mentioned it in class that morning. He said, of course, the boy couldn't understand because he couldn't speak English, but we could all understand who Prabhupada was talking about, that if you simply come, just as Narada Muni, he rendered menial service to the Bhaktivedantas, and in that way he was able to become Narada Muni. So if you simply do menial service, washing the pots, anything to assist the Bhaktivedantas, then your spiritual life is on the right path. It's guaranteed. So this pot washing is very important for our spiritual advancement. Start at the bottom and slowly, slowly work your way up. Then Swamiji welcomed me into his kitchen and taught me how to make rasgullas. We boiled the milk, curdled it, and then I sat down and began rolling the curd into balls on a tray. As I rolled the balls, I would put them in little row along the tray, and every single ball had to be exactly the same size. Swamiji would take his thumb and first and second fingers and shoot the balls out of the row when they weren't the right size. And I would have to remake them until they were the right size. This went on until I had a full tray of balls, all the same size. Prabhupada was really training us. Then Swamiji showed me how to boil the balls of curd in sugar water. Malati, Janaki, and I were cooking in the kitchen, and Swamiji was singing. At one point, Swamiji stopped singing and asked me, "Do you know what your name means?" I couldn't even remember what my name was. He had told me at initiation, but because none of us used our devotee names, I couldn't remember what mine was. I said, "No, Swamiji, what does my name mean?" He said, "It means you are the mother of Krishna." And he laughed loudly and went back to stirring the rasgullas. So here we have Mother Yasoda feeding a rasgulla to Krishna. Prabhupada was really training her nicely. I couldn't understand who Krishna was, who in the world his mother would be, or how I was in any way related to her, but I was satisfied that Swamiji felt that I was somebody worth being. So finally, Nandarani, after the Gurukula, when the children all came here, Nandarani also came. By that time, she had a little son. She had 2 daughters also, and then the little son. And she lived at the Goshala, very austere life, raising her son and her children, serving her husband. And she was actually, when maybe we'll read about it in the coming chapters, when they went to Los Angeles to become president, run the temple, Prabhupada mentioned that Nandarani was more intelligent than Dayananda. So when she was here, you'll see at all of our Goshala land, we have roads, right? We have a whole road system. So it was Nandarani who set all of that up. She helped us for developing the Goshala very nicely when she was here. She was also the nurse at the Gurukula, saved a lot of devotees' lives. They still, whenever they see her, they would thank her for saving their life. It was very wonderful, such a wonderful devotee. So she was here for quite a few years before she went back to America. I finished cooking that afternoon about 4 o'clock, and then I went home to get dressed for the wedding. Although I had never worn anything but old dresses and jeans, Swamiji had suggested to the other ladies that they find a way to put me into a sari for the wedding. So we bought a piece of silk to use for a sari. I went to Malati's house. This is Malati behind Prabhupada. She was going to try to help me put it on. I couldn't keep it on, so she had to sew it on me. Then they decorated me with flowers and took me to Swamiji and showed him. He was very happy. He said, "This is the way our women should always look. No more jeans and dresses. They should always wear saris." So that was our standard. We always wore saris. It didn't matter where we were, what we were doing. We always wore saris. And we didn't have saris. We would have to buy material and create saris that way. We'd buy 6 yards of material and learn how to wrap it. And all the devotees wore saris. There were no questions of fashions. Absolutely, Punjabi suits didn't exist. Prabhupada said they were they came from the Muslims, and no gopi skirts, none of that. We all wore saris. Now, why did we wear saris? The men wore dhoti kurta, and the women wore saris, and Prabhupada explained to us that that's because in the spiritual world, that's the way that people dress. So we were practicing. So if you practice now, you can just enter right into your spiritual life at the end of this lifetime when you go back to Godhead. So this is Prabhupada's wonderful lady devotees. This is at a Pandal program in India. You'll see everyone wore saris. Actually, I looked a fright. I kept stumbling, and they had to sew the cloth on me, but Swamiji thought it was wonderful. The cloth was all one color. So Swamiji said, next time you should buy cloth that has a little border on the bottom, so it's 2 colors. I like 2 colors better. Okay, so we were in America. None of us had ever seen a sari in our life. We didn't know how to wear saris. I remember hearing at the Denver temple when our god sister Akuti joined. There were no women in the temple. So Jai Pataka, he taught her how to put a sari on. And then, so not only that, but in America, there are places that are very, very cold. So when we were running a temple, a very cold part of America, Pennsylvania, what we did was, see, there was a devotee who joined, his name was Bhavananda. He joined in San Francisco soon after, we'll read about him. And he used to be a fashion designer. So when he joined, he started to make systems, fashion systems for the devotees. That the brahmacharis, of course, they should wear saffron color. The brahmacharinis, you'll see in this picture, they should also wear saffron color. And the grihastas, they should wear yellow color. So this is how we dressed. And we didn't realize that you should have, if you're married, you should have a border and things like that. Because he had set the system for all the devotees in the whole society. Maybe they were 50, 100 devotees by that time. So that's how we dressed. And in the winter time, when it was cold, we would buy whole rolls of wool. And we would make our dhotis and saris out of wool because it was free. We would have to go out on Sankirtan. It would be snowing, freezing cold. So we had woolen dhotis and saris in the winter time. This is Sankirtan in Boston. When we went downstairs to the wedding, Swamiji met my relatives. He spoke to them very politely. My mother cried a lot during the ceremony. I was very satisfied that she had been blessed by meeting Swamiji. So another devotee who joined at this time, her son had joined, and she followed him into Krishna consciousness. She was practically Srila Prabhupada's age. Her name was Devahuti, and she was an artist. So Prabhupada gave her very, very nice assignments to paint. You'll see in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, there's a picture of Krishna, there's a picture of Lord Chaitanya, there's a picture of Radha and Krishna, and then there's a picture of Lord Chaitanya. Prabhupada was having her describe how Krishna is Lord Chaitanya, and Lord Chaitanya is the combination of Radha and Krishna. So she happened to be in our temple on my wedding day. And again, we had no women in the temple. It was all men, and I was the woman. So I didn't know how to prepare for a wedding. So because she had been in San Francisco, she knew. She put a beautiful sari on me and decorated me with flowers. So each one of us, we were all helping each other learn the systems that Prabhupada was teaching from the very beginning to these core devotees. And then these devotees, by traveling around, they were teaching each one of us how to carry on these traditions that Prabhupada was teaching in ISKCON. I don't know what would have happened had she not been there. Now this is a new devotee that's joining. Steve Bollert, age 20, born and raised in New York and now living the hippie life in San Francisco, had read in the Oracle, that's one of the hippie newspapers there, about Swami Bhaktivedanta's coming to San Francisco. The idea of meeting an Indian Swami had interested him, and responding to a notice he had seen posted on Haight Street, he had gone along with Carolyn Gold, the woman he was living with, to the airport to meet Swami Bhaktivedanta. He and Carolyn had both gotten a blissful lift by chanting Hare Krishna and seeing Prabhupada, and they began regularly attending the lectures and kirtans at the temple. So again, now Satsvarup Maharaj is introducing another key figure amongst Prabhupada's disciples. We'll read, Stephen would become Subal Das, and his wife, Prabhupada would get them married. She was Krishna Devi. Subal, he opened up several temples for Prabhupada. He opened up the Santa Fe Temple. He opened up the Philadelphia Temple. Then Srila Prabhupada awarded him sannyas in 1970. And he came here, and he was our temple president when the devotees were still living at the Radha Damodar Temple. So Prabhupada wanted him to work on the construction of this temple. But he wasn't interested in construction. He just wanted to preach. So he left Vrindavan only after being here for a few months and went back to America and helped with our new Vrindavan project. So he had a long list of wonderful assignments and accomplishments that he had done for Srila Prabhupada in his Krishna conscious life. This is Subal and Srila Prabhupada. This is when he was in Vrindavan here. Steve decided he wanted to become like the Swami. So he and Carolyn went together to see Prabhupada and request initiation. Speaking privately with Prabhupada in his room, they discussed obedience to the spiritual master and becoming vegetarian. When Prabhupada told them that they should either stop living together or get married, they said they would like to get married. An initiation date was set. Prabhupada asked Steve to shave his long hair and beard. "Why do you want me to shave my head?" Steve protested. Krishna had long hair, Ram had long hair, Lord Chaitanya had long hair. He was arguing with Srila Prabhupada. And Christ had long hair. Why should I shave my head? Prabhupada smiled and replied, "Because now you are following me." There was a print on the wall of Surdas, a Vaishnava. "You should shave your head like that," Prabhupada said, pointing to Surdas. So the devotees, they had found the Brijbasi posters, and they were putting them up around the temples. So this is one of the posters that they had found when Surdas came to Bilvamangala Thakur. When he came to Vrindavan, he would sing, and Krishna would bring him milk and listen to his singing. "I don't think I'm ready to do that yet," Steve said. "All right, you're still a young man. There is still time. But at least you should shave your face clean and cut your hair like a man," because he had long hair. On the morning of the initiation, Steve shaved off his beard and cut his hair around his ears so that it was short in front, but long in the back. He only half surrendered. "How's this?" he asked. "You should cut the back also," Prabhupada replied. Steve agreed. To Steve, Prabhupada gave the name Subal, and to Carolyn the name Krishna Devi. A few days later, he performed their wedding. So what later happened was, because by that time the number of devotees was increasing, So Prabhupada started to send these Grihastha couples out to open temples. And at that time, there were a lot of students in the Santa Fe, New Mexico area. It had also become a center of the counterculture. So they went there to open a temple, and Prabhupada also came there to visit. But then Krishna Devi, although they had just married, Krishna Devi, another boy joined there. He was initiated, and his name became Dinesh. And one day, Krishna Devi and Dinesh disappeared. They left. And Subala, of course, was very upset by that. He decided he wouldn't marry anymore. And what Krishna Devi and Dinesh did was, they went to Israel, and they opened a temple in Tel Aviv. And that was one of the first international temples that we had in Israel. So that was why soon after Prabhupada awarded Subal sannyas, because his wife had left him, and he was a very serious devotee, very, very good at making devotees. And many of us are very grateful to him for the preaching that he did in those early days. Since each ceremony was another occasion for kirtan and prasadam distribution, onlookers became attracted. And as the spiritual names and married couples increased with each ceremony, Prabhupada's spiritual family grew. The harmonious atmosphere was like that of a small, loving family. And Prabhupada dealt with his disciples intimately, without the formalities of an institution or hierarchy. So, of course, Prabhupada, he was our spiritual father. And when he initiated us, for instance, those who were initiated by letter, he would write, "My dear daughter, Daivi Shakti," whatever our name was. So he took himself to be our spiritual fathers, and we were his sons and daughters. But then at one point, the relationship changed, because Prabhupada, he had to get his immigration. We're all hearing about how difficult it is to get immigration in America these days, and it was difficult then also. So Prabhupada, he thought maybe if his disciples adopted him as their son, then he could get his immigration papers. So he said that Nandarani and Malati and Janaki, all these devotees who had a very loving relationship with them, but they also had a motherly feeling towards him because they were very protective of him. So he said that I'm just like your son, and one of you can adopt me. So Prabhupada was just joking with them. But he had such a wonderful relationship with all of these early devotees because he could give time to all of them. There weren't that hundreds and thousands of devotees where he knew all of their names and they could come and speak to him anytime. It was much more intimate in the early days. Disciples would approach him for various reasons, entering the little apartment alone or with others, as he sat on a mat before his makeshift desk in the morning sunlight. With men like Mukunda, Gurudas, and Shyam Sundar, Swamiji was a friend. With Janaki and Govindadasi, he was sometimes ready to be chided, almost like their naughty son. Govindadasi would be, anyone who was doing service for Prabhupada, we would become very protective. Prabhupada, that's going to make you sick if you eat it. Please be careful. When we were cooking for Prabhupada here, he was training the devotees how to cook for our restaurant. And of course, devotee prasadam and restaurant prasadam, there's a world of difference. Devotees eat very simply, rice, dal, chapati, sabji, and khichdi. And in the restaurant, they had to learn how to make so many fancy things. So he was testing the cooking. The devotees would cook something, they would bring into Prabhupada, parathas, kachoris, samosas. And as he was eating these things, his health was going down. And finally, one day, he sent in a message to me. He couldn't eat it all. He said, just make me khichdi, only khichdi and kadhi. He couldn't eat because he had been eating all these fancy fried things and his digestion was finished. So we were very worried about Prabhupada. And we were wondering, his servant at that time was Upendra. So Upendra and I were talking in the kitchen that, well, why don't we just go in and talk to Prabhupada and tell him to stop eating all that restaurant stuff. It's making him sick. You know? And Upendra said, well, all right, I'll talk to him. I'll go in and tell him right now. We were, having a pep talk. Who's going to talk to Prabhupada? Tell him what to do. So he went in and he talked to Prabhupada. He said, Prabhupada, you're becoming sick from eating all of this restaurant prasadam. Maybe you should stop eating that and just go back to your regular meals. And Prabhupada looked at him and he said, oh yeah. He got so sick that we had to call a doctor. And when Prabhupada eats in the wrong way, he would get symptoms of diabetes. So the doctor put him on a very strict diet. He couldn't have rice. Prabhupada, how can you live without rice? He couldn't have potatoes. How can you live without potatoes? He couldn't have sugar. So, that's what Prabhupada ate. So, I was supposed to not cook rice, not cook potatoes, not cook anything with sugar in it. So he calls me in, he says to me he wanted a particular preparation called Punjabi bodi. Punjabi bodi you have to make with potatoes. It's a very spicy Punjabi, it's a bodi made out of 5 different kinds of peppers. And you fry it, crush it up, and cook it with potatoes. And I said, oh, but Prabhupada, you can't eat potatoes. And he looks at me but he wanted Punjabi, So I'm looking at Prabhupada, and Prabhupada's looking at me. And I said, okay, I'll make it with cauliflower. He said, all right. So that's why when Upendra went into Prabhupada and said, Prabhupada, maybe you should stop eating all of this rich food because it's making you sick. And Prabhupada said, the doctor says you have to stop eating this. Prabhupada said, we are not Dr. Das. We are Krishna Das. Prabhupada just went on eating with it. So Govinda, with Janaki and Govinda Dasi, he was sometimes ready to be chided, almost like their naughty son, or he would be their grandfatherly teacher of cooking, the enforcer of the rules of kitchen cleanliness. And to all of them, he was the unfathomable, pure devotee of Lord Krishna, who knew the conclusions of all the Vedic scriptures, and who knew beyond all doubts the truth of transmigration. He could answer all questions. He could lead them beyond material life, beyond hate-ashbury hippiedom, and into the spiritual world with Krishna. So these devotees, they had full faith in Srila Prabhupada. They were willing to give up their jeans, their boots, their long hair, their dirty habits, and they belong to Prabhupada now, as Prabhupada told Subala. Well, now you're following me. So although Subala had a very good logical reason why he shouldn't cut his hair, because Prabhupada told him to do it, he did it. So the devotees had faith in Prabhupada. At the end of the Brahma Samhita, there's one sentence that exclusive faith in me is trust. So though they didn't know much about Krishna, they didn't know much about the spiritual world, they didn't know where Prabhupada was taking them, they trusted Prabhupada and they had faith in him. In the very first step in spiritual life is Shraddha. And then after that Shraddha, then you get Sadhu Sang. Ado Guru Ashraya. That the first step in spiritual life is to take shelter of the Guru. So they had a little bit of faith that Srila Prabhupada, he knows something we don't know. And we are putting ourselves at his lotus feet so that he can train us to become devotees of Krishna, whatever that means. As Nandarani said, she didn't know who Krishna was, she certainly didn't know who Krishna's mother was, and she didn't know what she had to do with either of them. But she had faith in Srila Prabhupada, and therefore she took initiation from him. It was 7 p.m. Srila Prabhupada entered the temple dressed in a saffron dhoti, an old turtleneck jersey under a cardigan sweater, and a chador around his shoulders. So it was chilly, it was cold. San Francisco gets cold, they have winds coming in from the ocean. Walking to the dais in the rear of the room, he took his seat. The dais, a cushion atop a redwood plank 2 feet off the floor, was supported between 2 redwood columns. In front of the dais stood a cloth-covered lectern with a bucket of cut flowers on either side. Covering the wall behind the dais was a typical Indian madras of cloth, with Haridas's crude painting of Lord Chaitanya in kirtan hanging against it. So there's mention here of redwood, because in that part of California, in Northern California, you have trees, redwood trees, some of them up to 5,000 years old. Some of these trees were on the planet when Sri Krishna was on the planet. The trees are so big that you can make a tunnel through the tree and a car can go through it. That's how big, and so tall. So these trees would live for thousands of years, their whole forests of them, and when the trees would die, they would fall over, and the ocean was nearby. They would go into the ocean, and they would from the ocean they would come onto the shore, and that was called driftwood. The wood would drift in from the ocean onto the beaches. So Shyam Sundar, he was a carpenter, and he would collect that very good, strong, hard redwood, this redwood lumber, and make things out of it. So he made a makeshift place for Prabhupada to sit and do his lecturing, and a place for Prabhupada to put his books, all out of this redwood wood that you find only there. Srila Prabhupada picked up his kartals, wrapped the cloth straps around his 4 fingers, and looked out at his young followers sitting cross-legged on the burgundy rug. Burgundy is a dark red color. The men were bearded, and almost everyone wore long hair, beads, exotic clothing, and trinkets. The bulbs hanging from the ceiling diffused their light through Japanese paper lanterns. The Navajo God's Eye symbols, Navajos are American Indians, different tribes in America, of like the natives, the native tribals. God's eye symbols dangled from strings. Prabhupada began the ringing 1, 2, 3 rhythm, and Shyam Sundar began pumping the harmonium. Although the harmonium was a simple instrument, a miniature piano keyboard to be played with the right hand and bellows to be pumped with the left hand, no one in the Frederick Street storefront knew how to play it, so it became simply the drone. So anyone who knows about harmoniums, they're different keys, and behind the keys, there are wires, and if you pick up the wires, it becomes a drone when you press the bellows. Just 1 or 2 different chords are heard. So because the devotees didn't know how to play the tunes properly, they would just pick up the wires and it would become a drone when they pressed the bellows. Another important kirtan instrument, the two-headed mridanga from India, was meant for intricate rhythmic accompaniments. But even Mukunda could play it only very simply. Last year we read about kitata, 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 ta. So Prabhupada was teaching the different mantras to Mukunda. But they were all very, very simple mantras, whereas Srila Prabhupada knew very advanced different types of mantras of the mridanga. The Mukunda could play it only very simply, matching the 1, 2, 3 of Prabhupada's kartals. There were other instruments on hand. A kettle drum, that's a kettle drum. See that? Looks like a big pot. The pride of the temple. Hayagriva's old cornet, that's like a trumpet. It's a big trumpet. A few conch shells, and a horn Hayagriva made by shellacking a piece of kelp. Kelp is a kind of seaweed. So when you make it shellac, you can make it into a horn, right? He had found on the beach. Some guests had brought their own flutes, pipes, and bongos. But for now, they let their instruments remain still and clapped to Prabhupada's rhythm as he sang the evening prayers, the Mangalacharanam. Prabhupada would start the kirtan with Mangalacharanam. Prabhupada's Sanskrit hymn praised the Vaishnava spiritual masters. For each great devotee in the disciplic succession, he sang a specific prayer. First, he chanted the poetic description of the transcendental qualities of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Then Gorkishore Das Babaji, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, one after another. One prayer describes Srila Bhaktisiddhanta as, quote, the deliverer of the fallen souls. And another praised Gorkishore Das Babaji as renunciation personified, always merged in the feeling of separation and intense love for Krishna. Srila Prabhupada sang of Lord Chaitanya, the golden complexioned Supreme Personality of Godhead, who distributed pure love of Krishna. And he sang of Lord Krishna, the ocean of mercy, the friend of the distressed, the source of creation. As Prabhupada became absorbed in the bhajan, his body trembled with ecstatic emotion. The group on the floor sat swaying from side to side, watching him. His eyes closed in meditation, his delicate practiced fingers expertly playing the cymbals. They heard the heartfelt minor moods and tones of his voice, unlike anything they had heard before. So this is Srila Prabhupada sitting there at his dais, and the madras cloth has been removed to the side. And above Prabhupada is that painting that we heard about last week that he asked Govindadasi to paint. It's a painting of a painting. Inside the painting is the painting of the Panchatattva, and Prabhupada wanted his feet, his head, to be right at the lotus feet of Lord Chaitanya. You can see that here. Then he began the familiar mantra they had come to hear. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. And immediately they joined in. The horns and drums sounded, and soon all the other instrument players joined in. Gradually, a few at a time, members of the audience rose to their feet and began to dance. Prabhupada's followers stood and began stepping from side to side as he had shown them, sometimes raising their hands in the air. Others moved as they pleased. Occasionally, opening his eyes and glancing around, Prabhupada sat firmly, chanting, though his head and body were trembling. So here Prabhupada is leading the devotees in kirtan. Those who have become his students, they know the Swami step, where they would dance with their arms, as Lord Chaitanya and the Panchatattva would dance, arms in the air, and from side to side, putting their feet in front of each other's. And the others danced as whatever their imagination drew them to dancing. You can see the videos of their wild dancing. But Prabhupada tolerated it all. Why? Because they were all chanting Hare Krishna. And that was the purpose of his coming there to America, to introduce this chanting of Hare Krishna. All right, it's past time now. We'll hear more next week. Hare Krishna. Jai.